Too old to swim at 69. She just won her first medal. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The pool water smelled like chlorine and childhood, memories buried deep under years of regret. At 69, Irene stood at the edge of the public swimming pool, gripping the rail with fingers that once held babies and stirred pots of soup, but never dared to hold a dream for herself. "I'm sorry, Mom," the young instructor said gently. "These lessons are usually for beginners, as in children." Irene looked down at her worn sneakers and nodded politely. But inside, something cracked. She remembered being 7, watching other children swim freely while she stayed on the shore, told over and over by her father, "Swimming isn't for girls, and certainly not for girls like you." She never learned, not when she was young, not when she was married, not even after. The divorce. There was always someone telling her it's too late. Now, alone in a small apartment with peeling walls and photos of people who no longer called, Irene decided she would die trying, or finally learn to float on her own. So she came back, again and again. Every morning, just as the sun rose, she slipped into the cold water. She splashed, she coughed, she panicked. Children laughed, teenagers filmed. One posted a video titled, "Grandma Almost Drowns in Pool Again." It went viral. Her neighbor knocked that night, holding her phone. "Are you okay? People online are making fun of you." Irene nodded slowly. "Let them laugh. I'm not doing this for them." Still, the humiliation stung. She stayed away for 2 weeks. Then one day, as she watered her plants, she saw a little girl outside crying beside a puddle. "I fell," the girl sniffled, "and they laughed at me." Irene knelt beside her and said gently, "Then we get back up. That's what we do." That night, she returned to the pool. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. Jack Morris had been the pool maintenance man at the Chicago Municipal Pool for 35 years. He'd seen swimmers come and go, champions rise and quit, but he'd never seen anyone like Irene. Her determination was both admirable and painful to watch. Each morning, she arrived at 5:30 sharp, her silver hair tucked neatly under a floral swim cap that had probably been fashionable in the 60s. The water seemed to fight her, and yet she fought back with quiet persistence. "You know," Jack said one morning, leaning on his mop, "I could give you some pointers. Off the clock." Irene looked up at him, water streaming down her lined face. "Why would you do that?" "Because," he shrugged, "I used to coach the high school team. Before my knees gave out." Irene considered this. She was used to doing things alone, raising her daughter after Tom left, working 2 jobs, taking care of her mother through the long, cruel years of dementia. Accepting help felt foreign. I can't pay you," she said finally. Jack laughed. "Lady, I'm 73. I'm not looking for a job. Just something to do besides watching game shows." The next morning they began. Jack was a patient teacher, but didn't coddle her. "Forget everything," he instructed. "Think of your body as a boat. Boats float naturally." "Boats sink all the time," Irene retorted. "Only the poorly designed ones." Jack winked. For 2 weeks, Irene just learned to float, to surrender her weight to the water, to trust that she wouldn't sink. Sometimes she failed, sometimes she swallowed water and came up sputtering, but sometimes, just sometimes, she felt weightless, free. By the 3rd week, Jack introduced arm movements. By the 4th, kicking. Irene's muscles ached in places she never knew existed. She bought herself a bottle of arnica gel and rubbed it on her shoulders each night before bed. Her daughter Nancy called one evening, and Irene found herself excited to share her progress. But when she mentioned swimming, Nancy's voice tightened. "Mom, be serious. You're almost 70. Why risk hurting yourself? For what?" "To prove something." Irene's enthusiasm deflated. "It's just swimming, Nancy. It's unnecessary." "What if you drown? What if you have a heart attack? Who's going to take care of that mess? Me. Always me. After they hung up, Irene sat on her small balcony, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Chicago. Maybe Nancy was right. Maybe this was foolish vanity. Who was she to think she could reinvent herself at this age? What if all this ended in humiliation, or worse? But what was the alternative? To wait quietly for death, watching daytime television and sorting medications into little plastic compartments. She couldn't go back to that emptiness. She wouldn't. Will Irene find the courage to continue despite her daughter's disapproval? Or will Nancy's fears bring her mother's newfound passion to a premature end? Margaret Chen had been teaching swimming to Chicago's children for nearly 20 years, but she'd never had an adult student quite like Irene. Most adults who couldn't swim either avoided water altogether or were content to wade in the shallow end. But here was this woman, nearly 70, showing up every morning with the determination of an Olympic hopeful. "Your form is improving," Margaret commented one morning, having observed Irene's practice with Jack. "But you're still fighting. The water when you breathe." Irene paused, clinging to the pool's edge. "I can't seem to get the timing right. When I turn my head, I panic." Margaret nodded. "May I show you something?" For the next half hour, Margaret demonstrated a simplified breathing technique. "Think rhythm, not timing," she advised. "Like walking. You don't consciously tell your legs when to move. They follow a rhythm." Irene practiced until her arms trembled with fatigue, but by the end of the session, she could swim 10 meters without stopping. It wasn't pretty, but it was swimming. "You're not half bad," Jack said, offering her a hand out of the pool. "For a beginner." Irene smiled but winced as she stepped onto the deck. Her hip was protesting after the morning's exertion. "You should take tomorrow off," Margaret suggested, noticing Irene's discomfort. "Recovery is as important as practice." But Irene shook her head. "If I skip a day, I might not come back." At home, Irene found a letter from Nancy. Inside was a brochure for a senior living community in Florida. "Think about it, Mom," the note read. "You could meet people your own age, they have activities, medical staff on call. You wouldn't be alone." Irene set the brochure aside. Nancy meant well, but she didn't understand. This wasn't about being stubborn or refusing help. This was about finally living on her terms. That night, Irene dreamed she was swimming in open water, powerful strokes carrying her through gentle waves. In the dream, she wasn't afraid. She was strong, capable, free. The next morning, Irene woke to a text message from an unfamiliar number. It was a link to another video. Heart sinking, she clicked on it. This one was titled, "Swimming Grandma Makes Progress." The video showed her swimming those 10 meters with a caption, "Day 30 update. She's actually doing it. Never too late. Dome Grandma swims." The comment section was filled with encouraging messages. "This is inspiring me to try again. Go, Grandma, go. I'm rooting for you, swimming Grandma." Tears pricked at Irene's eyes. Someone had seen her struggle, seen her improve, and instead of mockery, they'd chosen encouragement. Perhaps the world wasn't as cruel as she'd come to believe. That afternoon, she called Nancy. "I'm not moving to Florida," she said without preamble. "I'm swimming in a seniors' meet in 3 months." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Irene checked to see if the call had dropped. "Mom," Nancy finally said, voice tight, "this isn't like you." "No," Irene agreed. "It's like the me I never got to be." Will Irene's newfound determination be enough to overcome decades of self-doubt and the physical challenges of learning to swim at her age? Or will the weight of others' expectations and her own fears ultimately pull her under? The Chicago Senior Games were not exactly the Olympics. They were held at the same municipal pool where Irene practiced, with folding chairs set up along the deck and a small electronic scoreboard that frequently malfunctioned. But to Irene, as she stood in line to register, it might as well have been Madison Square Garden. "First timer?" asked the woman at the registration table, a spry octogenarian with fiery red hair that Irene suspected came from a bottle. Is that obvious?" Irene's hands trembled slightly as she filled out the forms. "We all were once," the woman smiled, revealing slightly crooked teeth. "I'm Betty, 76 and proud of it. Started swimming at 68 after my Harold passed. Figured I'd either find a new purpose or join him. Turned out swimming gave me the first option." Irene found herself smiling back. "I'm Irene, 69, and I have no idea what I'm doing here." "Sure you do," Betty winked. "You're writing your next chapter." The week before the meet was the hardest of Irene's life. She practiced relentlessly, pushing through fatigue and soreness. Jack timed her laps, making small technical corrections. Margaret helped her practice diving off the starting blocks, a terrifying proposition that made Irene's heart race every time. "Remember," Margaret coached, "it's not about winning. For your first meet finishing is the victory." But a small part of Irene, a part she hardly recognized, wanted more than just to finish. She wanted to prove, to herself, to Nancy, to everyone who had ever told her it was too late, that she could exceed expectations, even her own. The day before the meet, Nancy showed up at the pool. She stood awkwardly on the deck, watching her mother complete a lap. "Your form's not bad," Nancy said when Irene noticed her and swam to the edge. Irene pushed her swim cap back. "What are you doing here?" Nancy sighed and sat on the edge of the pool, dangling her feet in the water. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being the you that you never got to be." She swirled her feet, creating little whirlpools. "I didn't get it at first. But then I remembered how you used to watch me at my gymnastics meets. How you never missed a single one, even when you were working 2 jobs. "Of course I didn't," Irene said. "I was your mother. And you never had anyone cheer for you like that, did you?" Nancy's eyes were suddenly suspiciously bright. "No, or never came to your anything." Irene was silent. It was true. Her father had been too strict, her mother too meek to stand up to him. And Tom had been too self-absorbed to notice anyone's dreams but his own. "I'll be here tomorrow," Nancy said finally. "Front row, with a ridiculous sign and everything." Irene blinked back tears. "You don't have to." "Yeah," Nancy nodded. "I do." The morning of the meet dawned bright and clear. Irene had barely slept, her stomach a knot of nerves. She dressed carefully in her new navy blue swimsuit, a far cry from the utilitarian black one she'd been practicing in, and packed her bag with trembling hands. At the pool, the atmosphere was festive. Seniors of all shapes and sizes milled about, many accompanied by family members bearing cameras and homemade signs. Jack was already there, dressed in a polo shirt that made him look oddly formal. "Ready to make history?" he asked with a grin. "Ready to not drown," Irene replied, scanning the growing crowd for Nancy. The 50-meter freestyle for women 65-70 was the third event of the day. As Irene lined up with the other 5 competitors, she felt a strange calm settle over her. These women, with their lined faces and silver hair, were just like her, late bloomers, survivors, women who had decided that the final chapters of their lives would not be defined by loss and limitation, but by courage and joy. "Swimmers, take your marks." Irene bent down, gripping the edge of the starting block as Jack had taught her. "Have you ever felt too old to try something new? Or do you know someone who discovered a passion later in life? Share your experience in the comments." The Chicago Senior Games continued with a festive energy that belied the ages of its participants. Event after event, seniors dove, swam, and championed their way through the water, each with their own stories of late-found passion and perseverance. Irene watched them all with newfound appreciation, no longer seeing age, but witnessing pure determination. Her own race had been a blur, the sound of the starting horn, the shocking cold of the water as she'd plunged in, the burning in her lungs as she'd pushed herself harder than ever before, focusing only on the black line at the bottom of the pool. She'd emerged from the water to discover she'd placed 4th out of 6, not last, as she'd feared, but not quite medaling either. Still, Nancy had cheered like Irene had won gold, waving a glittery sign that read, "World's Most Buoyant Mom," in huge letters. Jack had clapped her on the back so hard she'd nearly fallen over, and even Margaret had looked impressed. "Not bad for a first-timer," Betty said, toweling off beside her after placing 2nd in their heat. "You've got good instincts. A little more conditioning and you could be dangerous." Irene laughed, then winced as her shoulder twinged. "I think my body disagrees with you. Bodies always complain about new things," Betty dismissed. "Question is, what are you going to do next?" The question lingered with Irene long after the meet ended. What was she going to do next? She'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. Learned to swim, competed in a meet, proved to herself and others that she wasn't just an obsolete old woman waiting for the end. But now what? The answer came unexpectedly 3 days later as she soaked in a hot bath, trying to ease her still aching muscles. Her phone rang. "Nancy." "Mom, have you seen it?" Nancy's voice was excited. "Seen what?" "The video from your race. It's gone viral. Over 100,000 views already. People are calling you Inspiration Irene." Irene nearly dropped her phone in the bathwater. "What are you talking about?" "Someone posted your race online with your backstory, how you just learned to swim, how you never gave up despite the early mockery. People love it. There's even a local news station that wants to interview you." Irene sank deeper into the bubbles. "That's ridiculous. I came in 4th. It's not about winning, Mom. It's about trying, about starting something new at 69. People find that, well, hopeful." Hopeful. The word echoed in Irene's mind long after she'd hung up. Could her small act of personal courage actually mean something to others? Could she be seen as something other than redundant in this youth-obsessed world? The next morning, she returned to the pool. Not to train this time, her body still needed rest, but to think. The familiar scent of chlorine welcomed her as she sat on a bench, watching. "The early morning lap swimmers. I thought I might find you here," Jack said, settling beside her with a grunt. "Saw your newfound fame online." Irene rolled her eyes. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" "Is it?" Jack studied her. "You know what's rare these days? Authentic courage. Not the flashy kind they show in movies, but the quiet kind. The kind that gets up day after day to face fear and failure because the alternative is giving up on yourself." Irene was silent, watching an elderly man slowly execute a beautiful butterfly, stroke across the pool. "People respond to that," Jack continued. "They're hungry for stories that tell them it's not too late." "But I didn't do anything special," Irene protested. "I just learned to swim." "You did what most people never do," Jack corrected. "You decided your story wasn't over yet." Will Irene embrace this unexpected second chapter of her life, becoming an inspiration to others, or will she retreat from the sudden attention, unsure if she's worthy of being called a role model? The news segment aired on a Tuesday evening. Irene sat stiffly on her couch, watching herself on screen with a sense of disembodiment, as if the silver-haired woman in the navy swimsuit was a stranger. The interviewer, a glossy young woman with impossibly white teeth, asked all the expected questions. Why swimming? Why now? How did it feel to be Inspiration Irene? On screen, Irene watched herself answer with surprising eloquence. "There's a difference between being alive and living. For too many years I was just alive. Swimming taught me how to live again." The phone started ringing before the segment even ended. Nancy first, bubbling with excitement, then Betty, cackling about Irene's 15 minutes of fame. Even her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, called to say she'd seen Irene on TV and was thinking of taking up water aerobics at the Y. But it was the email that arrived the next morning that truly changed everything. It came from a woman named Diana Winters, the activities director at Lakeshore Senior Living. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," the email read, "but I saw your interview and immediately thought of our residents. Many of them struggle with finding purpose and physical activity as they age. Would you consider coming to talk to them about your experience, perhaps even helping to start a swimming program?" Irene stared at the screen for a long time. Teaching others? The idea was absurd. She was still a beginner herself. She had no qualifications, no expertise to offer. And yet, she thought about her own father's rigid rules, about Tom's dismissiveness, about every voice that had ever told her you can't or you shouldn't or it's too late. She thought about how different her life might have been if just one person had said instead, "Why not try?" She replied to Diana with shaking fingers, "I'm not a teacher, but if my story can help, I'd be honored to share it." The Lakeshore Senior Living Recreation Room was packed when Irene arrived the following week. Residents in wheelchairs lined the walls, others sat in rows of plastic chairs, some dozing, others alert and curious. The youngest looked to be in their 60s, the oldest well into their 90s. Diana, a brisk woman in her 40s with a practical ponytail, introduced Irene with unexpected reverence. Mrs. Crawford didn't start swimming until she was 69 years old, she explained to the gathered seniors, and just 3 months later she competed in the Chicago Senior Games. Irene felt her face flush at the smattering of applause. This was all being blown out of proportion. She hadn't won anything. She'd barely managed not to embarrass herself. But as she began to speak, telling her story of fear and failure and unlikely persistence, she saw something change in the faces watching her. Skepticism gave way to interest. Boredom transformed into engagement. By the time she finished describing the moment she'd completed her first full lap without stopping, she saw tears in more than a few eyes. "I'm not special," she concluded. "I was afraid every single day, I still am, but I discovered that doing something scared feels better than doing nothing safe." The questions afterward were heartfelt and numerous. How had she overcome her fear of water? Did she have joint pain? Was it ever really too late to learn? Irene answered each one honestly, admitting her struggles and small triumphs. Afterward, a tiny woman with a magnificent crown of white hair approached, leaning heavily on a cane. "Mildred Ross," she introduced herself, extending a gnarled hand. 92 years young, as they say. Terrible expression, but there it is. Irene smiled, charmed by the woman's directness. "I was a dancer in my youth," Mildred continued. "Broadway, nothing famous, just chorus. But I loved it. Haven't moved properly in years." She tapped her hip with her cane. Replacement. Never felt right. "I'm sorry," Irene said, unsure where this was heading. "Don't be," Mildred waved dismissively. "Just wondering if this swimming business might work for someone like me. Water's supposed to be good for joints, isn't it?" "It is," Irene confirmed. "It made a huge difference for my hip." Mildred nodded thoughtfully. "Well then, when do we start?" And just like that, the Lakeshore Swimmers Club was born. Diana moved quickly, arranging transport to the local YMCA pool twice weekly. Irene found herself designated as the club's unofficial cheerleader, alongside a retired physical therapist who handled the technical instruction. They started with 6 brave members. By the 3rd week, they had 15. Watching Mildred lower herself into the water for the first time, her face a mixture of terror and determination, Irene finally understood what Jack had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about swimming, not really. It was about reclaiming possibility at an age when the world expected only decline. What will happen when Irene faces her biggest challenge yet, preparing her senior swimmers for their first public demonstration at the annual Lakeshore Family Day? The Chicago winter descended with its customary vengeance, transforming the city into a landscape of white and grey, but inside the heated YMCA pool, the Lakeshore Swimmers Club flourished. Mildred had progressed from clinging to the edge to executing a respectable backstroke. Howard, a former accountant with Parkinson's, found that his tremors subsided in the water. Sophie, who'd suffered a stroke 2 years prior, regained strength in her left side. For Irene, these Tuesday and Thursday sessions became the highlight of her week. She wasn't their official instructor. That role belonged to Paul, the retired physical therapist, but she'd become something equally valuable, proof that progress was possible. "How did you get over the fear?" Violet asked one day, a retired librarian who still wouldn't put her face in the water. "I keep panicking." Irene considered this. "I don't think I ever got over it completely," she admitted. "I just decided that fear wasn't the boss of me anymore." As December approached, Diana proposed an ambitious idea, a water demonstration at Lakeshore's annual Holiday Family Day, when residents' families gathered for festive celebrations. "Nothing fancy," Diana assured them during their pool session. "Just a chance to show your families what you've been working on, maybe a simple routine to music." The suggestion was met with nervous laughter and a few outright refusals. But to Irene's surprise, Mildred spoke up. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she declared, her white hair tucked neatly under a floral swim cap remarkably similar to Irene's. "I haven't performed in front of an audience in over 40 years. About time I had another go." One by one, the others were persuaded. Even Violet eventually agreed, though she negotiated to stay in the shallow end. Planning for the demonstration consumed the next 3 weeks. Paul choreographed a simple routine that showcased each swimmer's abilities while accommodating their limitations. They practiced diligently, laughing at their mistakes and cheering their successes. For the first time in years, Irene felt truly part of something. This odd assortment of elderly swimmers had become a community, supportive, honest, and surprisingly fun. They shared stories of their lives before old age had narrowed their worlds, before swimming had expanded them again. The day before the demonstration, disaster struck. Paul called Irene in a panic. "My daughter's been in an accident," he explained, his voice tight with worry. "Nothing life-threatening, thank God, but she needs surgery. I have to fly to Phoenix immediately." "Of course you do," Irene assured him. "Family comes first." "Dude, but the demonstration—" "We'll figure something out," Irene said with more confidence than she felt. "Don't worry about us." After hanging up, Irene sat in her apartment, heart racing. Without Paul, the demonstration would have to be cancelled. All their hard work, all their courage, for nothing. Unless... Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed Jack's number. "I need a favor," she said when he answered. "A big one." The Lakeshore Recreation Hall was transformed for Family Day. Twinkling lights hung from the ceiling. A massive Christmas tree dominated one corner. Folding chairs were arranged in rows facing the large screen where a video of the pool demonstration would be shown, filmed earlier that day at the YMCA. Irene sat in the front row beside Diana, her stomach in knots. Behind her, the room filled with residents and their visiting families, children, grandchildren, even a few great-grandchildren. The swimmers themselves were scattered throughout the audience, some looking nervous, others beaming with anticipation. "Thank you for stepping in," Diana whispered as they waited for everyone to be seated. "I thought we'd have to cancel for sure when Paul called." Irene nodded, still not quite believing what she'd done. With Jack's help, she'd led the final practice and served as poolside director during the filming. She'd arranged the swimmers in their positions, counted out the rhythm, and cheered them on through every movement. And now, the Lakeshore director announced from the small podium, we have a special treat. Our newly formed Lakeshore Swimmers Club has prepared a demonstration to show that it's never too late to make a splash." Polite laughter rippled through the audience as the lights dimmed and the video began to play on the screen. There they were, Irene, Mildred, Howard, Sophie, Violet, and all the rest, arranged in a semicircle in the YMCA pool. The opening chords of "What a Wonderful World" filled the room as the swimmers began their routine, simple arm movements in time to the music, gradually progressing to more complex patterns. Mildred executing a graceful twirl in the water. Howard swimming a confident breaststroke across the width of the pool. Sophie and her partner performing synchronized movements. And there was Irene, not just participating but guiding, her face alight with confidence and joy. When had that transformation happened? When had the terrified beginner become this assured woman? As the music swelled to its conclusion, the swimmers formed a line and one by one submerged themselves completely underwater before resurfacing with arms raised in triumph. Even Violet, who'd sworn she never would. The video ended. For a moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted in applause. Families stood, cheering. Someone whistled. Beside Irene, Diana wiped away a tear. One by one, the swimmers stood to be recognized, their faces flushed with pride. When it was Irene's turn, she rose shakily to her feet, overwhelmed by the wave of applause washing over her. In that moment, surrounded by new friends and their loving families, Irene finally understood the full meaning of what she'd started when she'd first stepped into the water at 69. It had never really been about swimming at all. Will Irene's journey from reluctant beginner to inspirational leader culminate in a personal triumph that affirms it's never too late to dive into life's possibilities. The following spring, Irene found herself once again standing on the deck of the Chicago Municipal Pool, butterflies dancing in her stomach. The annual Chicago Senior Games had returned, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Mildred, resplendent in a violet swimsuit with matching cap, and Howard, looking distinguished in navy blue trunks and a determined expression. "Remind me again why I let you talk me into this," Howard grumbled, but his eyes twinkled. "Because you're too competitive to sit on the sidelines," Irene replied, adjusting her own swim cap. "And because you've been practicing that freestyle turn for months." It was true. After the success of the Holiday Family Day demonstration, the Lakeshore swimmers had continued their twice-weekly sessions, and several had expressed interest in competing. Jack had volunteered his coaching services, and together with Irene, they'd prepared a small but mighty team for the Senior Games. Nancy approached, carrying programs and wearing a T-shirt that read, "Swim like nobody's watching, except us." She'd become the team's unofficial cheerleader and logistics coordinator, arranging transportation and managing registration forms. "They just posted the heat assignments," Nancy reported. "Mum, you're in Heat 3 for the 50-meter freestyle. Mildred, you're in the 70-plus backstroke at 11. Howard, you're—" "Let me guess," Howard interrupted. "The old men who should know better division?" Nancy smiled. "The 75-80 breaststroke. And you're seeded second, by the way. Your qualifying in time was impressive." Howard tried to suppress a pleased smile, but failed miserably. The morning passed in a blur of activity. The Lakeshore team had set up camp in a corner of the pool deck, complete with folding chairs, coolers of water, and handmade signs. Betty stopped by to wish them luck, sporting a new silver medal from her earlier race. "Look at you," she said to Irene, "all grown up with your own team now." Irene laughed. "Hardly my team, just a group of friends who don't know when to quit." "Best kind there is," Betty winked. As Irene's event approached, she found herself strangely calm. Last year, she'd been terrified, of failing, of looking foolish, of confirming every self-doubt she'd ever harbored. Now, standing on the starting block for her heat, she felt only a quiet determination. She wasn't here to prove anything anymore. She was here because she loved the water, loved the challenge, loved the woman she'd become through accepting it. The starting horn sounded. Irene dove cleanly into the pool, her body remembering all the training, all the early mornings, all the techniques Jack had patiently taught her. She swam not desperately but deliberately, each stroke powerful and precise. When her hand touched the wall at the end of her race, Irene immediately looked up at the scoreboard. 3rd place. A bronze medal, her first medal ever. As she climbed out of the pool, she was engulfed by her teammates' cheers. Nancy hugged her, soaking her swim shirt in the process. Jack gave her a high five, so enthusiastic it stung. Mildred dabbed at her eyes with the corner of a towel. "Not bad for an old lady," Howard said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Not bad for anyone," Irene replied, still catching her breath but grinning from ear to ear. Later that day, as the Lakeshore team celebrated their collective achievements, Mildred's 4th place finish, Howard's silver medal, Sophie's personal best time, a young reporter approached their group. "Mrs. Crawford, Irene Crawford, I'm from the Tribune. We're doing a feature on inspiring seniors for our health section. Would you have time for a few questions?" Irene hesitated, looking around at her friends. The old Irene would have demurred, uncomfortable with attention, uncertain of her worth. But that woman was gone, transformed by chlorine and challenge and community. "I'd be happy to," she said, "but only if you include all of us. This isn't just my story anymore." That evening, as Irene prepared for bed, her bronze medal hanging from her bedside lamp, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but she answered anyway, still riding the high of the day's events. "Mrs. Crawford," a woman's voice asked. "My name is Diane Reynolds. I'm calling from the National Senior Swimming Association. We saw your story last year, and we've been following your progress with the Lakeshore group." Irene sat on the edge of her bed, curious. "Oh, yes, we're organizing a national tour to promote senior swimming programs across the country. Demonstrations, talks, beginner clinics. We'd like you to be part of it. Your story, from never having swum to winning a medal at 70, it's exactly the kind of inspiration we want to share." For a moment, Irene couldn't speak. A national tour. Her, traveling the country, speaking to groups, sharing her experience. I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Say yes," Diane encouraged. "We need voices like yours, people who understand that it's never too late to start something new, to live fully." Irene glanced at her reflection in the bedroom mirror. Her silver hair was still damp from the pool. Her cheeks were flushed with the day's excitement. Her eyes, yes, her eyes were different than they'd been a year ago. Brighter, more alive. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "Yes, I'd be honored." As she hung up, Irene walked to her window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, glittering against the night sky. The city that had been her home for decades suddenly felt different, not just a place where she existed, but a launching point for an adventure she never could have imagined. She thought about the frightened woman who had stood at the edge of the pool just 1 year ago, paralyzed by doubt, and decades of being told no. That woman could never have pictured this moment. A bronze medal, a national tour, a purpose that extended far beyond her own small life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. "So proud of you today, Mom. Dad never would have believed it." Irene smiled. Tom wouldn't have believed it, neither would her father or any of the voices that had limited her for so long. But their disbelief no longer mattered. What mattered was what she believed about herself. The National Senior Swimming Association tour began in Phoenix that June. Irene found herself standing before a crowd of seniors at the Desert Palms retirement community, sharing her story just as she had at Lakeshore, but with growing confidence. "I won't pretend it was easy," she told them, the medal hanging around her neck catching the Arizona sunlight. "There were mornings I could barely move from soreness, days when progress seemed impossible. moments when I questioned my sanity. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. But here's what I discovered, Irene continued. Our bodies may change with age, but our capacity for joy doesn't have to. Our capacity for growth doesn't have to. Our capacity for courage certainly doesn't have to. After each talk, people approached her, women and men in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, sharing their own stories of deferred dreams. A man who had always wanted to paint, a woman who longed to play the piano, another who had given up dancing when her husband died. "Do you think I could still learn?" they asked, their eyes holding the same mixture of hope and doubt Irene recognized from her own mirror. "I think," she would answer, "that the only way to find out is to try." As the tour continued, Denver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Irene's confidence grew. She found herself partnering with local swimming instructors, sometimes even entering the water herself to demonstrate techniques. The tour's social media accounts shared videos of her helping an 85-year-old woman float for the first time, both of them laughing with the pure joy of it. Jack called her regularly, keeping her updated on the Lakeshore Swimmers' progress. Mildred had recruited 5 new members. Howard was training for the National Senior Championships. Diana was working to install a small therapy pool at Lakeshore itself, inspired by the program's success. "They miss you," Jack said, "but they're proud as punch to see their coach making waves across the country." "I'm not their coach," Irene protested, but she smiled at the thought. When the tour reached Los Angeles in August, Irene received a surprise. As she prepared for her talk at a beachside senior center, she looked out into the audience and saw a familiar face. Nancy had flown in, bringing Irene's grandchildren Emma and Tyler with her. After the presentation, Nancy hugged her tightly. "I always saw you as just Mom," she admitted, "the person who took care of everyone else. I never saw this version of you." "I never saw this version of me either," Irene replied. "But I think she was always in there, waiting for permission to exist." That evening, walking along the Santa Monica beach with her family, Irene watched her grandchildren splash in the gentle waves. Tyler, always the more cautious one, stayed close to shore. Emma ventured deeper, fearless. "Mom," Nancy said softly, "Emma wants to know if you'll teach her to swim properly when school starts. She says she wants to be like Grandma." Irene's heart swelled. "I'd be honored." The tour concluded in New York in September with a special event at the historic YMCA in Manhattan. Irene, now something of a celebrity in senior swimming circles, found herself sharing the stage with Olympics gold medalist Janet Evans, who had come to show support for the initiative. "What's your advice to someone who thinks it's too late to try something new?" the moderator asked them both. Janet spoke eloquently about perseverance and the joy of challenging oneself at any age. When it was Irene's turn, she thought for a moment. "A year and a half ago," she began, "I was a 70-year-old widow who had never put her face in the water. I believed what I'd been told my whole life, that dreams were for other people, that trying new things was for the young." The audience was silent, attentive. "Now I know that's nonsense," Irene continued, her voice strong. "Age isn't what limits us. Fear is, and the beautiful thing about fear is that we can choose to feel it and move forward anyway." She fingered the bronze medal that she still wore for these events. "I'm not special. I'm just a woman who finally got tired of standing on the shore. So if you're wondering if it's too late for you, my answer is this. The water is waiting, and so is your brave, beautiful, unlived life." The applause was thunderous. Later that night, in her hotel room, Irene received an email from a publishing house. They wanted her to write a book about her journey. From shore to swimming, it's never too late to dive in. The advance they offered was modest but significant, enough to renovate her small apartment, maybe even add a few comforts she'd never allowed herself to consider. As she considered the offer, Irene thought about the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. One decision, one moment of courage, on a quiet morning when she'd finally decided her life wasn't over yet. She typed her reply, "I would be delighted to share my story." When Irene returned to Chicago, the city was awash in autumn colors. Jack met her at the airport, leaning on a new cane but smiling broadly. "Welcome home, champion," he said, giving her an awkward one-armed hug. "Hardly a champion," Irene laughed, "just an old woman who learned to float." "Don't sell yourself short," Jack said seriously as they walked to his car. "Do you have any idea how many people you've inspired?" The Lakeshore program has a waiting list now. 3 other facilities in the city have started their own senior swimming initiatives. You've started something, Irene. She shook her head, still uncomfortable with praise. "All I did was try not to drown." "Sometimes," Jack said wisely, "that's enough." The following week, Irene visited Lakeshore for a special reunion with her swimming group. They welcomed her like a returning hero, peppering her with questions about the tour and showing off their own improved techniques. "We've entered a team for next year's senior games," Mildred announced proudly. 10 of us. Jack's been coaching. "And we named ourselves after you," Howard added with a gruff smile. "The Irene Inspires. Terrible name, but we were overruled." Irene felt tears spring to her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Mildred said firmly, "we did." That afternoon, they all swam together, not training but simply enjoying the freedom of movement, the companionship, the joy of bodies in motion regardless of age or ability. Afterward, they gathered in the Lakeshore cafeteria for tea and Diana's announcement. "The therapy pool will be installed by Christmas," she reported to cheers and applause. "And we've received a grant to expand our swimming program to seniors with more limited mobility. We're calling it the Crawford Program for Aquatic Renewal. If that's all right with you, Irene." Irene couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by the impact of her small, brave choice, rippling outward in ways she never could have imagined. That night, back in her apartment, Irene began outlining her book. She started with the little girl on the shore. Watching others swim told she wasn't meant for water. She wrote about the long, dry years of caretaking and responsibility, of putting others first. She wrote about standing at the edge of the pool at 69, terrified but determined. As she typed, memories flowed through her fingers. The sting of chlorine in her eyes, the ache in her muscles, the exhilaration of her first full lap, the humiliation of early failures, the surprising joy of late-in-life friendship, the sweet taste of unexpected triumph. Dawn was breaking when she finally closed her laptop. She went to the window and watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan, painting the water gold. In a few hours, she would meet Nancy and the grandchildren at the YMCA for Emma's first real swimming lesson. Irene touched her reflection in the glass, smiling at the woman she saw there, silver-haired, lined, and more alive than she'd ever been. "It's never too late," she whispered to herself and to anyone else who might be listening. The water is always waiting. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.